two major themes that I saw kind of really come true over the past 4 or 5 days at South by. One is just this blurred lines. I mean, there are blurred lines everywhere. There are politics and marketing and culture and technology just really intersecting, and it's really hard to see different parts of society. I mean, you have panels that are called Brands, the New Political Reality. You have to give blood in order to enter into a brand activation. I mean, there's just so many blurred lines that it was a sort of an interesting South by just to see all of those things come together. And the second thing was really innovation. It used to be at South by, things launched, they took off. Sometimes they kind of were let go in South by in a matter of 3 or 4 days. But innovation itself, we didn't see anything like launch, but we saw like application of the innovation.
Well, I thought the two things sort of went together. I remember us talking while we were there, like, hey, nothing new, but this extension of brands as politicians, or brands having to be everywhere that people are, just seemed like a larger extension of continuing the themes we're seeing before, whether it's large socio-political issues or the ways that technology interacts in the home. Those things aren't new, but the ways in which brands were showing up and extending themselves into our lives further just seem to be more and more on point.
The brands that were activating and earning attention from everyone who was there, the ones that had the lineups and people engaged, were the ones that had meaning. You see an activation where you can play tons of video games, but it was empty next to a company that sells fertilizer that was full, because the fertilizer activation had ways for people to interact with each other on a human level, and that's really what we saw.
One of my favorite things from that activation was this pillow that everybody was like fighting after, which said, "I'm a plant parent." And it was sort of telling culturally that that's the way in which people are interacting with that brand. I also felt like there were a lot of problems I didn't know I needed solutions to that kind of like hit me in the face. Obviously there was like a robot on every single corner, lots of them wanting to like cuddle you and kind of be a little bit more human. Scooters, I mean, we should probably talk about the scooters. That was crazy, and I know a lot of cities are struggling with, like, 2 weeks ago they didn't have e-scooters, and now is it the future of travel, or is it just a
kind of the example of everything we talked about. There was the larger issue of sustainable mobility and how that works in a city, and then there was just the annoyance factor of them being discarded on every corner and us sort of making jokes. But to be honest, when we got halfway through and then we ended up trying it was something that served a real purpose. We were in a crowded city with double the people. We were late for an event. We got there on time. It cost us $2. And it sort of changed our minds throughout the conference, which was just a cool experience live to have over a 4-day period.
Yeah, to be clear though, at least you left your scooter with the kickstand.
Yes, I did. I parked it properly, just for the record.
Throwing them everywhere. I mean, they were fun. It's and at the same time, though, to your point, it's like you wonder if we're removing this human element through the algorithm, and that's what Douglas Rushkoff talked about. He just wrote the book Team Human and had a fantastic talk. Ironically, he was pulled away because of a human situation. He had someone in his family who had to go and stay in the hospital. So he was speaking through a screen to everyone, and he identified that as an irony. But his point was that these algorithms are taking over, and it's the human side of things that we're seeking and that we want to see from brands and companies, and those are the ones that will win ultimately.
I think that's a really good point and segue to a lot of the discussion around the future of news, and especially local news. And I mean, we went to sessions on local news and disinformation, and we saw some really incredible speakers talk about the role that community newspapers and community news in upholding democracy. And actually, it wasn't just stats that people were talking about. We saw like solutions that were brought up both from the panelists, but also through the participants. And then you have, on the other side, we had BuzzFeed do a keynote launching a print edition right here with coupons at the back. I mean, it was a really interesting sort of media problem-solving experience too.
Well, I think it's interesting because we always want to come back from these things with key big trends, and we sort of said this at the beginning, but I would be even more interested to see where we go from this year, because it was such a touch point to, okay, we've evolved so to this point, and media's evolved a certain way, and now they're trying to solve problems that they weren't solving in the past. But even over the next 5 years, we might see some bigger evolutions from these moments where we've taken stock of the trends and we're continuing to follow them. We did have an experience where we saw a session about trends that we all sort of felt like, we know this. We knew this already. This is something that's not yet new. But then we had a deeper conversation about how, well, maybe there's different markers for those trends and different mediums and different ways in which they'll come to life. And I think that will be actually a really interesting conversation as we, talk to our clients and talk to the people we work with every day.
It's even, interesting to think as Canadians going down there that the U.S. seems to be just starting to talk about the loss of media outlets, and especially local media outlets. But that's been happening here even faster.
Yeah.
So maybe their conversation will affect ours up here, and we need to keep having it for sure.